everybody. Welcome back to the Catholic Culture Podcast. For the first 23 years of my life, I was really blessed to grow up in the Diocese of Arlington, Virginia, under Bishops Keating and Laverde. And so I was especially proud and pleased to learn that back in August, the current bishop, Bishop Michael Burbidge, had put out a document. It's called A Catechesis on the Human Person and Gender Ideology. And sort of following on some of the comments that Pope Francis has made in this increasing crisis of transgender ideology in our country, he makes some very helpful remarks to help people kind of think through these issues and respond to them in their parishes, in their schools, with their children, and to help people give pastoral counsel and guidance to people who are suffering from various psychological issues regarding gender. It's a great document, and I'm really happy to have here with me today a priest who helped put this document together, Father Stephen Schultz. He is a priest of the Diocese of Arlington, and he is the chaplain at St. Paul VI Catholic High School in Arlington Diocese. Father Schultz, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Thomas.
Well, it's great to have you here. I was so excited to hear about this document, and really pleased with the experience of reading it. It was very edifying to see a bishop actually speaking out on these things. I think maybe one or two others have, but this seems to be the first kind of like really lengthy intervention on the matter. Do you think that is that accurate?
I think it is. I've seen the documents from the other bishops who I know were responding to particular challenges in their own diocese, but Bishop Burbidge really saw the problem and sought to present a comprehensive approach that was a pastoral teaching document, as well as giving practical advice to parents and also to those who are struggling with gender dysphoria or some sort of sexual identity confusion, to give them the encouragement of the church, as well the encouragement of the love of Jesus.
Yeah, and this actually recalls to me, now that I think of it, a document that Bishop Burbidge's predecessor put out when I was in high school, at Seton High School in Virginia, on pornography, and that was also very, very timely. Sometimes these things don't get responded to until it's too late, but I think both of these documents were very timely, addressing the pornography crisis, which in many ways has probably led to a lot of the confusion over sexual identity. Certainly in my generation, it's almost a ubiquitous problem, and the generations younger than me. So, well, why don't we start with what was your involvement in the process of putting out this document?
Well, my own involvement was that I was one of the priests that Bishop Burbidge consulted with, and was part of a working group that drafted the document and reviewed it again and again and again for clarity, for the content and things. And I have to be honest, I had a role. I certainly had a role in this process. I don't want to claim that I did most of the writing of it. That fell to others who were real experts in this area. But it was a group effort to support the bishop in his mission. He sought to teach about this matter in the best way possible. And so there were a number of priests who were working on the document, as well as lay experts in various disciplines that contributed to this teaching document.
Right. I think one of them was, I was told it was Mary Hassan from the Ethics and Public Policy Center was involved.
Yes, that's Mary Hassan.
Hassan.
I wouldn't normally correct somebody's pronunciation, but yeah, Mary is definitely an expert in this area in the matter of public policy, and she herself is a lawyer, and she has seen the ground shifting under this matter, the language shifting. I mean, everything. So she is an expert who is really on top of this whole matter of gender ideology. She does a lot of speaking and a lot of writing on the topic. And in fact, after the bishop's document published, I had her come and speak with the faculty here at St. Paul VI High School before the students came back, in order to not just to give our faculty the document from the bishop, but also to teach about it and the current challenges in a very comprehensive way. So Mary really brought her expertise to assist the bishop, and also to assist me in my work here as a chaplain, supporting this community and our students.
Why do you think Bishop Burbidge chose you to be involved with the process?
Well, I am the director of the Encourage apostolate in the Diocese of Arlington for 10 years now.
Ah, great.
And
yeah.
So that apostolate that supports those who experience same-sex attraction or gender dysphoria, or who are reporting gender dysphoria. And I've seen increasing numbers of parents and even spouses reach out to get the support of Encourage. So that's part of the reason. From my pastoral experience, I also have a master's degree in psychology from Divine Mercy University.
That's makes you eminently qualified. So that that would be a good place to start, actually. So, I mean, what was it may seem obvious to the listeners, but I'm curious, as to why Bishop Burbidge chose to put out this document at this time, and maybe you can speak to, from your pastoral experience, of why this was kind of the moment to do this, and what needed to be addressed.
Well, in the Diocese of Arlington, we've seen in the public school systems a lot of effort on the part of those who fully espouse gender ideology and the so-called trans movement. So these are in local counties. The school boards have been setting policy that is affirming of gender ideology, and to the point of denying the parents' rights to know what is going on with their child, to give free access to anybody that a boy that might identify as a girl, to girls' restrooms and girls' locker rooms. And so this is these matters of public policy and the safety of our children have been at the forefront of our efforts in the diocese to really support the parents in raising their child, but also to have a safe environment for our children. So when I was at my old parish in Prince William County, it was when the school board, this was now 5 years ago, was pushing through policies that were inclusive policies, to use the word that describes this notion of being open to any way that any person may identify. And it was a real fight in that county. Now, it's an uphill battle, but in particular, Fairfax County and Loudoun County have been the epicenter of these debates in the public, in the school policy realm. And I think that
not just on gender either for Loudoun. I mean, I've certainly heard of Loudoun County being clashes between parents and school board have been in the national news.
Oh, absolutely. And so I think that what those who are truly supportive of the gender ideology movement, they're kind of seeing these counties and school boards as sort of a test bed for what they might hope to do in other areas throughout the country. So that was one of the reasons why that the bishop wanted to respond in this way and make this document for the support of the faithful, and also for our clergy in addressing these matters. I in the last 8 months or so, there's been weeks when I've gotten 2 or 3 calls a week from the parents of middle school aged children who are reporting gender dysphoria, or saying that they are non-binary, or they are the opposite sex, and they want to take on a new name and pronouns. And this is heartbreaking for parents, and also confusing. So they're really looking for truth and looking for the support of the church in this regard.
Yeah. Well, so are those students typically in public schools?
Yes.
Okay. So there's much less of this in the Catholic school system?
Well, it's very much part of the teens world because of social media, because of
Right.
Hollywood, because of the news. So, and when it's kind of glamorized as the civil rights issue of our time, the a lot of young people want to be seen as allies, and they want to be seen, like as part of the in group, the winners, as opposed to the ones who seem to be being cast into outer darkness these days. So, I mean, it is very much part of the teens world, and um, we have to, but in our Catholic schools especially, we have to teach with the courage and the full truth of the gospel, but to do it in a relational way, because the students, they need to understand themselves and each other in the light of God's love and God's truth. And I think that's really the only way that we're going to be able to win their hearts and minds to the full truth of who they are, and to see themselves and each other properly, because that is really the matter. It's a matter of anthropology, and it seems the last thing that a teenager is thinking of. But when they have a friend who identifies as trans, or they want to use different pronouns, they're not thinking of it as an error in the way that they see that person, in the way that they're not understanding that person is made in the image and likeness of God, body and soul. They're not seeing that. But then to awaken that, I think, is to also awaken them to the truth of who they are. So it's a conversation that, conversations that need to be had, and truth that needs to be taught in any sort of environment. Now, we're free in the Catholic schools to do so. Obviously, there's a huge burden on parents who have their children in the public schools right now, who are really struggling with this and how to respond.
One great thing about this, one thing we have on our side here as Catholics is thankfully statements from Pope Francis that are pretty clear and unambiguous in criticizing gender ideology. And the document opens, well, actually, it's near the beginning. First, we have from Pope St. Paul VI a quote: "It is an outstanding manifestation of charity towards souls to omit nothing from the saving doctrine of Christ." So there you get a combination of the doctrinal and the pastoral, which is like a seamless. The two are not put at odds. But then we've got these great quotes from Pope Francis, and the bishop cites a couple of them. In one, Pope Francis wrote, this is from Amoris Laetitia: "It needs to be emphasized that biological sex and the sociocultural role of sex, gender, can be distinguished but not separated. It is one thing to be understanding of human weakness and the complexities of life, and another to accept ideologies that attempt to sunder what are inseparable aspects of reality." Then later he says, "Valuing one's own body in its femininity or masculinity is necessary if I'm going to be able to recognize myself in an encounter with someone who is different." And this is Bishop Burbidge kind of combining, paraphrasing quote here. "Thus, realizing that human persons are part of human ecology reminds us that man too has a nature that he must respect and that he cannot manipulate at will. The human body has intrinsic meaning. Through the body, we encounter not only other human beings, but also the moral law which is inscribed in our nature." And so that's helpful. But another thing that it does is to situate the debate over gender in the wider crisis of concepts of human nature, of the relationship between the body and identity more generally than just issues of gender. So maybe you can talk a little bit about how the document puts that in this wider context of the modern crisis.
Well, we have Christian anthropology, which I think the document does a beautiful job of first explaining in the light of human reason what we can know about the body and the soul together in the unity of a person, and that unity is an individual person as well. That biological sex is ordered to marriage as well. We can know by the light of reason, and then it presents this truth of how we as Christians, male and female. We image the Trinity. The family is meant also to image the Trinity. The family is meant for children as a communion of love as well. So it takes into account all of these other truths of Christian anthropology about the human person made in the image and likeness of God, and presents the truth of that God gives ourselves to us as a gift, and that gift includes our body and our soul, and that we can receive we can receive our bodies as a gift, and so then we don't have to struggle against them, and that's really a path to maturation and kind of integrating the sense of ourselves as a child of God, to accept ourselves as a gift and know that there's so much about our lives that we don't choose, but one of those things is our biological sex. And so God wishes for us to receive that as a gift, wishes for us to see that in one another as well. And I honestly think that really takes a lot of pressure off of people that might be feeling this profound disconnect between their body and their soul and their sense of themselves. If they might pause and think, this is really a gift to me, and despite my feelings, I can understand this as a gift, and then come to terms with it on that level, as opposed to just the discomfort or that disconnect or that alienation from the body as a symptom that needs to be treated, in some extreme way with chemical or surgical interventions. So that's in a sense the meaning of Christian anthropology, and really I think something else that is at the heart of what it is that God and the church have to offer, especially those who are struggling, versus the damage that comes from all of these other ways of trying to address that problem of our alienation from our body, that really is one of the effects of original sin.
Yeah, and my favorite aspect of this document on a theological level is how it connects all these different issues together with the gender issue. I mean, for example, you mentioned relationality. I mean, one of the things that the bishop says is kind of pointing back to marriage itself. He says the differences between man and woman are ordered towards their complementary union in marriage. Indeed, the differences between man and woman, male and female, are unintelligible apart from such a union. So there he points back to kind of the previous issue of homosexual marriage, I would say, in kind of seeing how we've got here to where the differences become unintelligible. And, you could also point to, contraception, for example, as a way of eroding the differences between man and woman in our practical living, such that they no longer seem that meaningful or important to us in our lived experience, as the phrase goes.
That's correct. I mean, separating sex from marriage and marriage from sex and sex from procreation has wrought all of these social evils that we're seeing them reverberate in so many ways. And that is a fact. If we followed God's plan, God's design, and accepted that as a gift, then we wouldn't have so many broken families or broken individuals, because of these well, they're social sins, but they're also personal sins as well.
But he also traces this back in a more primordial way to the fall. So he says essentially that the sexual wound and alienation from our own body begins with the response of our first parents, Adam and Eve, to the fall. And so that also kind of situates this issue in a way that I would say puts less weight on this as like one issue to be given greater importance than any other. And I don't mean that in kind of like a seamless garment type way, as that would often be said, but I mean that in the sense that I with regard to the debate over homosexuality, I've often said just about all of us have sexual hang-ups or psychological issues related to sexuality of one kind or another, and they may not be so drastically disordered as attraction to the same sex, but everybody has to deal with it. And so there's kind of this false compassion where we're expected to treat people with one particular type of issue as special, and so that we can't say that there's something wrong with what they're doing. And yet I have to address the disorders within myself, even if I'm not same-sex attracted, even if I don't struggle with gender identity in the kind of like in such a like a black and white way. So I think that's kind of important too. And it also, there's a flip side to that, which is that you can't treat people who are struggling with those issues as though they're fundamentally different from you as a fellow fallen human being.
That's correct. And I think this theological explanation, it gives the matter of same-sex attraction and gender dysphoria, it puts it in the proper context. And as you said, that I mean, everyone bears a certain cross within themselves. There's that aspect of the wound of original sin. It affects different people in different ways, but it can't be said that God made me this way. I know that's said so often, and that's somehow how someone may come to terms with that or justify the choices in their life. God made me this way. And it's just not so. It's original sin that is causing that particular conflict, or the attraction, or that sense of alienation from one's body, or the confusion about one's identity. It is one of the effects of original sin. And of course, to heal original sin, we need grace, love, and truth. And that grace, of course, comes to us from God. The love comes to us in nurturing relationships, and the whole truth of who we are as God's sons and daughters comes to us in and through the church. Christ really shows us who we are. So I encourage my students here, and whenever I am talking with parents or talking with a child or an adult that may be struggling with same-sex attraction or reporting gender dysphoria, I will say, pray that you can understand yourself in the light of God's love. And I think that that's an opening for grace, and people understand that there's more to them than what it is that they're experiencing, and it will help to heal that wound, that wound of that aspect of the effects of original sin in us.
So this document focuses on combating gender ideology as an ideology in sort of the public square, which has probably been more the focus of Pope Francis's comments as well, rather than sort of criticizing individuals. And it also talks about the pastoral care, the compassion and sensitivity with which to treat actual people who are struggling with gender identity issues, and also the need to be honest with them and give them the truth, which we'll get to. But one thing that's not addressed by the document is how this sort of ideological thing manifests itself when people are declaring their gender in some abnormal way, sort of as an ideological statement, perhaps for attention or popularity, or perhaps kind of just as an act of rebellion, which of course this ideology ultimately is. It is a rebellion against sort of submitting to our nature given to us by God. Mm-hmm. It is a kind of a deconstruction of being in that regard. But so what I wanted to ask about is, from your pastoral experience, of course there are people who would be more properly labeled as struggling with gender dysphoria, but then there's a lot of people, and as this stuff becomes more and more popular, this is something Abigail Schreier wrote about in her book, from what I understand, although I haven't read it, is this kind of like social contagion of declarations of different forms of gender identity that are not actually based on they might be based on psychological issues, but not necessarily specifically sexual ones. So I'm wondering, how do you distinguish between someone who is genuinely struggling with a deep-rooted issue and somebody who is kind of making claims that are more disingenuous about themselves, if that makes sense? And how do you respond to them differently?
Well, I will say that with a lot of the young people, for example, those children and their parents are calling me. The kids are in middle school. That is really a matter of a social contagion, rapid onset gender dysphoria, and that there may be within among a group of friends at school, one of them reports gender dysphoria, or even just the questioning, maybe I'm a boy, and then suddenly 3 or 4 of the other girls in that the young people call them friend groups. I don't really like that language, but they're among their friends that they all of them suddenly all of them are trans, or they're all got some other issue, like they're saying that they're non-binary or something like that. So I have seen quite a bit of that. I think that's really is what is so prevalent, especially among young people, it is a seductive lie, because what it gives them is a sense that they can escape from the discomfort of adolescence and growing up, whereas they need to grapple with the questions that they're having. They need to grapple with perhaps the discomfort that they have with their body. I mean, I don't know any middle schooler and many high schoolers that are not uncomfortable, at least at times, with their own body and don't feel at home in their own body. But it doesn't mean that they are somebody else. But that's what it's presented as. But in the gender ideology movement, is it's presented as a cure for adolescence in a sense. I don't think anybody is really, I don't think that they are saying that, but they're saying this is the answer. Like, you are someone else. And
Right.
And that's the thing that I think, I think it's the classic, even archetypal kind of desire to escape from one's life, and like, I've got amnesia, now I've got to figure out who I am and all of that stuff. And lots of old television shows and movies based on that, and novels and things, just that whole notion of what it would be like to escape from oneself. And so I think that of course, young people aren't really articulating it that way, but they really are seeking a way to understand themselves. And the trans movement kind of gives them, I guess, a lens through which they can see themselves and understand themselves. And like, well, this is the reason for my discomfort. This is the reason why I don't feel at home in my body, and why I feel strange and I feel socially awkward and all of those things. And so if this is the answer, then I have to follow through with all of these other things that are being suggested for me. So that answers part of your question. But I think the pastoral approach, I think first of all, it's difficult to distinguish between someone who is really having a sense of how do I say this? I guess what we would say, like, a clinical diagnosis of gender dysphoria with, say, a middle schooler or a high schooler that says, I'm non-binary, or I think I'm a boy. I think it certainly, this gender dysphoria certainly does affect a small number of people, much smaller than it really is seeming to be manifest right now in society. And the others, there's that confusion, but in the mind and in the heart, it can really take root as a very tenacious lie. So that's the thing that is very difficult to, that's the thing that's difficult to address from a pastoral standpoint, and from also the standpoint of the parents as well, because young people are getting a lot of propaganda about how this is who you are, and now you can understand yourself, and there are all these people that will accept you, and if your parents don't accept you, then they don't really love you, and you have every right to disown them or treat them badly, or and I've seen the brokenness that this causes in families so much, especially when there's maybe one parent divorced, the parents are divorced, and one parent is supportive of this new identity and the other parent is not supportive of it. So it can be very difficult to deal with that. But there's almost always, as the document states, there's almost always these other underlying issues, anxiety and depression, that gender dysphoria also affects autistic children at a greater percentage than it does children who are not on the spectrum. But it's because the autism causes that sense of oneself that is disconnected, and that can be, that can be a real cross for kids who are on the spectrum. So I mean, we know that for most young people that experience this or report this, they grow out of it as they mature. And so I think the best pastoral approach is to keep giving them the truth, keep loving, keep encouraging them, encourage them to take the pressure off of themselves, that they don't have to have they don't have to set their whole life on a course that is not going to be something that's going to solve any of the issues that they have, but it's going to make things worse, and can make things a lot worse. But to give themselves time to grow, to take the pressure off of themselves in that regard too.
Right. I think one of the pastoral challenges, and perhaps, even more dealing with adults, or as much dealing with adults than children, is one of the things I was getting at there is kind of like, we have this importance of compassion and charity and accompaniment and stuff, but there's probably certain situations where a person is essentially wasting your time and being disingenuous. And then, so there's also moments where the pastoral things to do is to be somewhat more brusque, or to be somewhat more stern, or somewhat more dismissive, and just say, you know what, I'm not buying into this. And that's especially the case when somebody is using it in a way such as to manipulate others, or as a kind of a political tool or something like that. Yeah, it is an interesting problem. It's like we do have to be innocent as doves and cunning as serpents at the same time, especially when somebody is doing something to get attention or whatever. But you can't make those assumptions right off the bat either.
That's correct. You can't. And parents, they can be so clear and even in the most loving way, and still, in the mind of a middle schooler or a teenager, they can hold on to that so tightly that it's hard to help them to see beyond it.
Yeah.
They, the problem with the anthropology, or the lack of an anthropology in terms of gender ideology, is that the body is just such a thing that can be changed. It's like an outfit that just can be changed, and it doesn't say anything about a person. It's something that can be manipulated or changed or mutilated, for that purpose of one imposing their own sense of themselves on, not just on others, but on their own body. And that's one of the worst things, because a person who will begin to go through those transitions, chemical interventions or surgical interventions, I mean, they have lifelong effects, and they don't resolve the underlying issues. And that is the thing that is brought out in the document, in as much as parents and children have a right to know about the nature of these chemicals, and about what the effects are, and even about the results of it. I mean, the chemicals, the drugs, are not approved by the FDA for the reasons that they're being used to treat children who are reporting gender dysphoria, and so the parents and the child, I mean, how can they even understand what the choice that they're making if they're not presented with all of that information? It's at the root of it, it's unethical, and it's evil. But there's a tremendous profit motive behind all of this, and that's also something that isn't really brought to light, at least in the media. That once someone starts on those cross-sex hormones, they are a customer for life, the surgical interventions. They mean that that someone might keep having to have surgeries because there's always complications, and the body isn't meant to be
Right.
manipulated in that way. It's sad to think that there are those that would want to profit from this so shamelessly. But I mean, just look at the number of gender clinics there are now in the U.S. as there were in the just some years ago. I think there's something like 300 gender clinics right now, and Planned Parenthood is giving out these cross-sex hormones to young girls who are coming in, and not really giving them any sort of counseling or psychological help, but rather just giving them what they're asking for, which is these cross-sex hormones that they think somehow is going to resolve the conflicts that they're experiencing within themselves.
So Bishop Burbidge, kind of after talking about the theology of it and the anthropology of it, kind of goes through kind of a list of things not to do. And like you mentioned, one of those is, giving hormones, surgery to change your sex or your bodily characteristics. He says denigration or bullying is bad of people with gender issues, but he also says to beware of the false compassion, which misleads and harms under the guise of compassion. I want to quote him here. Although the law of gradualness might prompt us to discern the best time to communicate the fullness of truth, in no circumstances can we confirm a person in error. And he goes on to say that this is particularly the case where children are concerned, because they need first and foremost to be affirmed in their permanent God-given sexual identity. And this is why medical and surgical interventions to arrest natural development in children are particularly wicked. I wanted to bring up a specific issue, which is probably even more than condemning surgical interventions going to be a problem for a lot of Catholics, which is the issue of using transgender names and pronouns to be accepting. So he says, such use might seem innocuous and even appear to be an innocent way of signaling love and acceptance of a person. In reality, however, it presents a profound crisis. We can never say something contrary to what we know to be true. To use names and pronouns that contradict the person's God-given identity is to speak falsely. And he also says, of course, attempts to coerce language in any way are unjust, to coerce people to use this kind of language. One thing I wanted to ask about right off the bat is this distinction between pronouns and names. I'm kind of curious why he says not to use names, because after all, your gender, your sex is a permanent God-given identity, but someone can change their name. So my approach in the past, well, I haven't really had to deal with this in a concrete way, but the way I've thought it through in the past has been like, okay, I'm never going to use a false pronoun for someone, but if somebody wants me to call them a different name, that's a concession I can make just for, communication's sake, because it's not actually saying something false anthropologically. So why do you think the bishop included names in that?
Well, I think a name, it can be it can be the bridge towards accepting an approach of affirmation of another identity. That it's sometimes the name isn't just a nickname, but rather it's a signal to others of that change. So there is, I mean, especially with children, there is something going on when somebody wants to be called by a different name.
With children, absolutely.
Yeah, and with adults, we want to affirm we always need to affirm someone in the truth. And I've grappled with this too, in the sense of, let's say that we meet somebody and we really have no idea that a gender transition has taken place, and they tell us their name. Well, on a human level, of course, you're going to say that person's name, use that person's name. You can acknowledge the name I think in a situation like that, and you're without affirming the false identity or the new identity, and yet with a child, if we start using a different name, I think it's going to feed into the it's going to feed into that idea that a child can just choose to be someone else of a different gender, or choose to be someone else. So the name, I think, the notion of using someone's proper name, or someone's given name, and not to well, I guess I don't know if I'm being very clear here, but when someone reports as non-binary, they might take on a non-binary name that isn't a name that is associated with and the idea of masculinity or femininity. So someone might take on the name of Summer or River or something like that. We don't want to affirm someone in something that isn't true about them in those circumstances. And I think the relationship really matters. If you've always known someone as John and suddenly say, no, my name is River, okay, well, there's obviously something going on there. And I mean, invites a discussion, and the bishop mentions listening with compassion, hearing their story. Why have they come to this point in their life where they're taking on this other name? I mean, it can be the beginning of a conversation that can kind of help them to feel that they have been listened to, that someone cares about them, but also to kind of give us also a context to broach that subject of, I know you as John, and we can acknowledge that we have a struggle there. I mean, well, I don't exactly know what to call you because I've always known you as John, and you're not any different to me. So I mean, I think we can. I fully agree with what the bishop is saying. So I'm not saying that. I think that there's some other situations where, if you don't know that there's a transition has taken place, that I don't think you're doing really any harm by just using the name that someone is telling you.
Now, you might also be able to tell that somebody is, supposedly transgender, but actually not know their original name.
That's true. That's true. And I don't think it would be pastoral in a situation, or caring or kind or compassionate, to say, well, clearly that's not your real name, or what kind of name is River. Right. You can't. I mean, that just can't be done. I'll give you sort of an analogy in terms of same-sex attraction. There are couples that part of the encouraged chapters that I have been ministering to for some years here. They've been living with a same-sex attracted son or daughter in a relationship or a civil marriage for a very, very long time. They do not accept the relationship, the behavior, the choices. But they can acknowledge that relationship is very important to their son or their daughter. And they can say, we know this is important to you. We don't agree with the choices that you're making. We love you nonetheless. I think there's a kind of an analogy in there in the sense of those who have taken on a transgender identity. And maybe perhaps they're adults, or we're meeting them for the first time, or it's somebody that we haven't seen in a very long time, and you can acknowledge that and meet them where they find themselves in their life, but to hope to be able to continue that conversation, to continue that relationship, to help lead them to the truth.
I was speaking with a Catholic friend the other day, and mentioned, that Bishop Burbidge had said, you can't use transgender pronouns, and because it's a lie, and he was kind of saying, well, no, sometimes you're just trying to be loving, and saying insisting on using the correct pronouns might just be driving them away or making them hostile or something. And what would you say to kind of wake someone who says that up to the fact that that's simply one of the concessions that you can never make in order to be pastoral? That's just that actually is a lie. You can't just pretend that the word doesn't have that meaning of conveying a false anthropology, that you're just playing along. Like somebody who doesn't agree with transgenderism but thinks it might be acceptable to use the pronouns.
Well, I think first of all, it does violence to language, and as much as it does violence to truth. I always think about pronouns. I mean, if you follow the daily Gospels, if any of the pronouns were changed or ambiguous, like they, them sort of pronouns, the Gospels would be unintelligible to us in English. And if you go back and look, even the Gospels in the last couple of days, you can't tell who's who if you suddenly are changing pronouns. That's the I think that's just one of the problems, is that if we're not using the pronouns that are the proper pronouns in accord with biological sex, we are confusing we're adding to the confusion that the person already has. We're making it harder to communicate as well. And I even have friends who are teachers in public school, and they say they really don't have an issue using pronouns, and a lot of students will just pick they, them because it's different than their biological pronouns. So they know my pronouns are they, them. So the teachers, just to keep it simple in the classroom, they just refer to everybody as they or them, and so it makes our communication unintelligible. I think from the standpoint of this notion of compassion for somebody else, or you don't want to push them away, in that, we do have a duty to keep the true image of our loved ones alive, and that true image includes that the fullness of body and soul, and that reality that all of that is a gift, and that they are a gift. And I think we've got to have the courage to use the proper pronouns for them, and not acquiesce to what even might seem like a little falsehood.
Yeah. Well, thank you. That's helpful. So I mentioned the way that the bishop succeeds in connecting transgenderism to all these other issues. One of which is, I think, brought up well in an article a while back in the Wall Street Journal by David Crawford and Michael Hanby, titled "The Abolition of Man and Woman." And in that article, they say that under the precepts of gender ideology, they say we're all transgender now. If anybody is transgender, we're all transgender. That is, the statement that I'm a woman in a man's body is not just a statement about that particular person, but it's a statement about all men and women. It's a universal statement about human nature. And as these authors put it, it means that sex and gender now only, quote, accidentally coincide in an overwhelming majority of instances, unquote. So when a little boy or girl is confronted with having to accept a transgender classmate, it throws his or her own identity and that of his or her parents into question. I mean, it throws this whole anthropology into question. Likewise, if I'm called a cis person, a cisgender person, meaning I identify with the biological sex of my body, that's not the same as me saying I'm a man. It's not a matter of indifference to me whether somebody labels me cis. That's actually them putting a false identity on me, because it implies that something false about my anthropology. So it absolutely is my business, what other people are saying about gender. Mm-hmm. It does profoundly affect me, and of course, most of all, it affects people who are most vulnerable to being scandalized by these falsehoods, such as children or people who are particularly confused about these things.
You're absolutely right in that it does affect all of us, and I think that you make a very good point about the use of pronouns. Is that pronoun isn't just saying something about the other person. That's saying something about human nature, and saying something about us, and saying something very important. And we can't just be reduced to they, them in that universal sense, or just that gender it has no meaning. The biological sex is revelatory, for us. And the other matter of gender ideology is that, look, if we have Christian anthropology wrong, then we have the incarnation wrong. And was Jesus trans? I mean, how do we know that he was a man? And then the
Yes.
nuptial image of Christ and the church falls apart if we don't have the proper anthropology.
Right. Yeah. Can I just quote Bishop
absolutely,
Burbidge on
absolutely.
this? Towards the end, one of the best parts of the document is towards the end. The transgender issue presents a particular challenge to the handing on of the faith. So much of our faith rests on the natural truths of the human person, the body-soul unity, and the complementary of man and woman. Jesus, our Redeemer, the Son of God, assumes the body-soul unity of our human nature, sacrifices himself and nourishes us by his body, and is worshipped as the bridegroom of the church. The rejection of core natural truths regarding our humanity damages the template that God uses to reveal himself to us and to manifest his salvific plan for us. When teaching on this issue, it is essential to situate it within the broader context of the nature of the human person, the body-soul unity, and the sanctity of the body. Transgender ideology does not exist in isolation, but it is part of our culture's broader confusion about the body, sexuality, man, woman, etc. And that's a really strong conclusion, because again, I think that is why this is such a great document. Aside from the strong stand that it takes on this issue, is the way that it shows how relevant it is to everything else.
Absolutely. It really is at the core of how we understand God, how we understand the church, how we understand ourselves as well. And it's also why it's so insidious, because it really attacks our faith at the very root. That's why we have to take a courageous stand, for the truth.
I mentioned pornography earlier. In your experience, how much of this is affected by the presence of pornography in a person's life?
I don't know that. I'm not sure that I can speak.
Like, for example, if a child is exposed to pornography at a young age, is that more likely to create this kind of confusion?
Well, I don't know, but I'm not. I'll tell you that in talking with parents, I am not hearing that pornography is part of the issue, at least with females, and I have not. I really can't. I can't think of any instance where a parent reported the use of pornography to me that was a contributing factor in that. Now, certainly, the use of pornography, it has.
More broadly
speaking, it is what does St. Thomas Aquinas say? It destroys the judgment of reason. It makes us blind. It makes us unable to make a commitment. Our hearts are closed to the truth of God, and we despair of that. And the remedies that God would give us to help us to be free of the shackles of lust are things that become loathsome to us because we don't want to pray and we don't want to see the truth. And I think that affects a lot of people. But I don't think that is, and a lot of young people as well, but I don't think that contributes to this gender confusion. It could contribute to same-sex attraction or confusion about who or what kind of people that one is attracted to, but I don't think it's affecting that one's sexual identity
on an individual level.
That's correct.
Right. So, it just occurred to me that my previous episode on this podcast also kind of dealt with this issue in an indirect way, and also another person from the Diocese of Arlington. I just interviewed Matthew Meehan, who teaches at the Heights, and he is recently authored a children's book, which kind of it's not about sexual identity, but it teaches children to kind of accept their given nature. That's kind of the theme of the book, and so. That kind of brings us to not how parents can deal with a child who's already having these issues, but what can parents do to kind of inoculate their children against both the propaganda that's out there and also the potential for actual psychological confusion, regardless of the wider cultural situation.
Well, the bishop addresses that in advice to parents in the document about being mindful and very careful about children's exposure to social media. I don't think young people need smartphones. I can see that, there might be a need for a phone in order to call home, but having the whole internet and social media and everything at their fingertips all of the time, I think is very, very damaging in a lot of ways. And especially with regard to exposure to some of these things that are just, the internet is just a fountain of untruth and can confuse people quite a bit. I think we're honestly raising children in accord with the faith and understanding the importance of grace, and not just being a Christian in name only, but that grace comes to us in the whole life of the church, and especially the sacraments. And it's not enough to be orthodox. It's not enough just to say, well, I believe everything that the church teaches, believes, and professes. I mean, it has to be lived in a very concrete way. So I think in the good literature that can awaken a children's mind to have a Catholic imagination, I think it's also very, very important. I mean, the students that I know here who are voracious readers and have read a lot of good things, their minds are just full of the beauty of creation and the truth of God, and they understand human nature better. They so that literature, it just has so much to teach us, good literature. The parents really do have a struggle, especially the ones whose children are in public school, because the propaganda is just, I mean, it's all over the walls. There's nothing that you can do about it. You can homeschool, you can try to get into a Catholic school. But we've seen enrollment up all over the diocese in our Catholic schools since COVID. And it's not just because the students are in school. It's because I think there are a lot of parents who they are running to the Catholic schools to save their children from what they see as unfolding in the lives of their family and their other family members and their neighbors.
So to wrap up here, what kind of response has this document gotten in the month and a half or whatever since it's been published? Month and 10 days.
Yes, well, the bishop did a lot of interviews when the document first came out, and the coverage in the Catholic media was overwhelmingly positive. And I think the reception amongst the faithful, at least from what I've heard in the Diocese of Arlington, there were many, many, many people who read the document, many who really appreciated the clarity, many priests who were preaching about gender ideology and preaching about the bishop's document after the document came out again. So I think there are many people that have had been very, very positively impacted by the document. There has been some coverage in the secular media. It's been pretty much what you would expect from the secular media. The stories have essentially been written before the interview even took place. So, and yet, I did an interview with a local news station, and in 15 minutes of my answers to the fellows' questions, they took 5 short phrases from what I was saying, and yet they took one phrase that I was shocked that they used it. I said, we did not create ourselves. We cannot recreate ourselves. And they actually put that in the news story. Now, I was shocked by that because I wouldn't think that. I think that would be the last thing that they would want to put in a story like that. And yet they did.
Interesting.
But it is so true. We have to come to terms with that very reality. We are made by God, and we cannot recreate ourselves.
Yeah, that's great. And actually, for the listeners, if somebody who wants to dive more into that idea specifically, I might recommend an earlier episode of the Catholic Culture podcast. Let me see, what episode was that? It's an old episode, but one of my most popular, episode 18, all the way back in fall 2018, on acedia, the forgotten capital sin, with R.J. Snell, because a big theme of that episode was kind of the metaphysical rebellion of modern man in not wanting to accept the good things that God is offering to him. So if people want to delve more into that specific broader issue, I think that's a really good episode to check out.
Father
Schultz, God bless you for your work. Thank you so much for coming on the show. This was really illuminating.
Thank you for having me, Thomas. I appreciate it.